Okay, these are notes 11.5, American influence grows. So this is kind of like America's age of imperialism, when we decide to kind of look outside our borders, use the same idea of manifest destiny, that we were, destined to take over the entire continent. Now, kind of putting that into Latin America and into the Pacific Ocean. That same idea of Americanism should be spread abroad, at least in the Western Hemisphere. So, what is imperialism? Imperialism is something you probably heard a little bit about in world history. It's the idea of the stronger nations putting their own control into smaller nations. Sometimes it was just political, other times it was all three: political, military, and economic control. Now, European nations and Japan all were what we call extractive economies. The imperial country wanted the raw materials from the colony, whether it was rubber, whether it was bananas, no matter what, timber. Sometimes, some of these European countries didn't have much timber, so they wanted timber, those raw materials, in order to make goods. Then we have America's perspective. America wanted to sell their excess goods. We had too many crops. We had too many consumer items that were being produced, and we wanted someone to buy them. So the whole idea was opening these countries up to trade, so that they would trade with us, and that they would allow not only us, but other nations to trade with them. Now, this schoolhouse model is quite unique. If you look here, you can see that the African American is cleaning the window, showing segregation and discrimination is still there. Over here we have Hawaii, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. And the schoolmaster's leaning over obviously they're in the front, they're the ones getting in trouble, quote unquote. They're the ones that need help. We have the Chinaman that's knocking on the door. He wants to come in, but remember, we don't like the Chinese, so we're going to exclude them. And then right here we have the Native American. He just wants his rights. He would like to be left alone, not made to assimilate. But we make him come in the schoolhouse, but we're not going to treat him like a pupil that we have here in the back, like the other whites. This is one of my favorite political cartoons to show imperialism, because it really shows some of the almost odd irony of America's ways of doing things. Now, if we look at this timeline, you can see that we first start with the Louisiana Purchase, this idea of expansion. We annex Texas. The Mexican-American War allows us to take places like Southern California, New Mexico, Arizona. Oregon Territory is a part of us. Also, around this time, we make our border between Canada solid. We purchase Alaska. Then we start to move outside of our country here in the 19th century. We start with the Treaty of Paris, Guam, Puerto Rico, Philippines. Then we annex Hawaii, Panama Canal, Virgin Islands, all the way up to the Swans Islands in 1920. All of these being more like territories rather than states, with the exception of Alaska and Hawaii. If we look at imperialism at this time period, you can see that ours is primarily the purple here, but you can see how we're expanding into the Pacific Ocean. We're really concerned about this Western Hemisphere. And we're a little bit concerned about the Caribbean Sea. This area of the world we really don't care about. We know that it's so split up between other nations. That's not our concern. And that's one of the reasons why ultimately we'll have a conflict with Japan, because we wanted the same islands in the Pacific. Now, Alfred Milan said a strong navy was needed to be a world power. If he wrote this book called Elements of Sea Power, and everyone read it, especially the people that ran the Pentagon, and said, that's a great idea. If we're going to have a world power, if we're going to be an imperialist nation, if we're going to be like England, then we need a strong navy. Also, the idea of social Darwinism, the idea that, we're bigger and better, so therefore we should rule, and Christianity's promoted American way of life. American missionaries would go into this area, and even though they promoted Christianity, they also encouraged assimilation into American ways. So when they gave up their traditional dress and they became more American-like, it was applauded, and they would bring natives back to America and show, look, these savages are becoming modernized. Commodore Perry sailed into Japan and established trade. When he did that, he helped a lot of things as far as America, but this establishment of trade is really good for a while, and then we kind of have a falling out among relations with Japan in about the 20s and 30s, which becomes our problem in World War II, where we start to be more competitive. But in the beginning, we actually modernized and trained the Japanese military. If you want a great example of that, The Last Samurai, the first part of The Last Samurai, shows an American veteran doing basically training with Japanese soldiers. Seward, he's going to buy Alaska from Russia. At first, it's going to seem like a really bad idea. Then we'll have the Klondike Gold Rush, and it was going to pay for itself 7 times over. It was only like $7 million in gold, which really is not that much. But at that time, people felt like that Seward was just a pawn of the Russians. And then eventually, Alaska ended up being a good choice for America. American businessmen are going to expand trade into Latin America. The idea of the Monroe Doctrine said this is North America and South America. We're the Western Hemisphere, and Europe and Africa and everybody on this side of the world, you stay out of our hemisphere. So, like, drawing this line is the Monroe Doctrine. It was established in the early 1800s, where basically James Monroe said they need to keep out of the Western Hemisphere. So after the War of 1812, and it was kind of our statement of we are independent and our whole area is independent. Any British involvement in this area was a violation of that Monroe Doctrine, that whether we had stated it or not, something that happens for a long time, if a country goes against that, that's seen as, negative or bad. Now, if we look here at our expansion, you can see the Alaska becomes a big part of that, but look at all these small islands, Wake Island, Midway, and some of those you've heard of, Hawaiian Islands, some of those because of World War II, that's where we fought some of the Japanese on, and eventually all the way over into the Philippines. Now, this is a far ways away from us also, but this because we're establishing all this trade in Japan and China, we want military bases to be able to be established in these areas so that we have a military power there. It's also a part of our imperialistic focus in America at the time. Now, sugarcane was a valuable resource in Hawaii. It was very important that sugarcane be harvested and sent back to America because that's where we got most of our sugarcane. We could have gotten it from other areas, but Hawaii was like our cheapest place to buy it. Now, this queen in Hawaii was overthrown by a coup, but most people argue that really, so what happened is her brother was the king, and then he died, and he was actually forced to sign a constitution that took away some of his power, and they wanted her to sign something even more, so they would basically be kind of like the head of Hawaii, but not really. And she refused to sign that. So when she refuses to sign that, we actually supported with troops, but it was secretly. So then we said, oh, Hawaii has declared independence, so we should annex them. So William McKinley in 1900 annexed Hawaii and made Sanford Dole, who also was the cousin of the owner of Dole Food Companies, who was very concerned about pineapples, bananas, and sugarcane because he was a fruit exporter, and that was his main business, and it's still around today. So this cousin becomes governor of Hawaii. Obviously, you can tell there was no backdoor deals in that one. Many people felt like Hawaii was really a breach on the rights of the natives. But really, a lot of that wasn't even seen until even up until 1990. Um, it just wasn't an importance in American politics or even talked about in our news media. It was just kind of like Hawaii happened and everyone turned a blind eye that it had been taken over and basically stolen from the original natives. Alright, that's all of notes 11.5.